So we're going to have that on the agenda for the next meeting. I'm going to review, I think we'll switch it up, and I'll do staff report right at the beginning. So the new members can hear kind of the organization of the meeting, how we get through the meeting, and I'll introduce the board, and then we'll get going. So there's existing members, Jeff Firstnow with Olaf Anderson Construction, Clay Dietrich Holmes, and Clay will be our acting chairman for today. So once I get through his staff presentation, he'll take over and run the regular agenda. Mark Konza, JLG Architects, Fargo. Dave Obermiller with Mission Mechanical could not be here today. We had 2 board members retire, Wayne Larson of Solon and Larson, and Harold Thompson, EAPC. And new members that took their positions were Justin Schoenberg of Sandman Structural Consulting, and Mike Wild of Wild Associates, who also could not be here today. I'll remind everybody this meeting is broadcast live. So we have the acting chairman will be Clay today. Mark Konza is current vice chair of the Board of Appeals. And next meeting is September 20th, which we'll have on the agenda for the election for the chairman and for the chairman. We can keep vice chair. A little bit about the Board of Appeals meetings and general functions. Number 1, request for interpretation of codes. We've had 2 of those in the past couple of years. They don't come very often, and I guess that's the way we like to see it. We're all working together to get everything done, and we don't have to have meetings on appeal. Findings of equivalency. There's options in the code to provide an equivalent that should actually comply with the code. Sometimes that's hard to see, so those types of things could come in front of this board. And then advising City Commission on adoption of the code. And I'll go through that process in a little bit. So at each meeting, we do follow Robert's Rules of Order. A quorum will be established by the chairman. The routine business will be completed through the agenda. Today, code changes will be presented. The meeting should last about 1 to 2 hours. And then we'll adjourn at the end of the meeting. The current building official or inspections administrator, myself, is the acting board secretary, and so the inspections department staff will record all the minutes of all the meetings, and that will be Gretchen Moreland today. The next meeting will be at the new City Hall. So maybe we could send a little notification with the agenda that tells them where to park and how to get in there, where we're going to be. And about the code hearings. The code hearings happen every 3 years. So we're on the current cycle to adopt the 2018 codes, previously 2015. We do publish all agendas of these meetings on our website. And we make an attempt to notify as many in the public as we can about these meetings for attendance. And they are broadcast live, like I said. All hearings are open to the public. Anybody can attend, and anybody can comment and present, make comments or amendments. Even the board members can do that themselves. So anybody can recommend any amendment to the code. And this is a traditional mandated role of the Board of Appeals to review all codes and send a final recommendation to the City Commission. The schedule of hearings, you should have received that starting today through February 21st. There are times when we won't have a quorum. We will try and find that out ahead of time so you know, and we can let you know as far in advance about the meetings if they're not going to happen. We have reserved March and April for additional meetings if they go along. Subjects may change. So if they look like they're running too long or something, we might move them one way or the other. And you'll know about those. It could be last minute. But we will do our best to adhere to the original schedule. The 8 codes we're going to review are the International Building Code, International Residential Code, International Property Maintenance Code, International Mechanical Code, International Fuel Gas Code, International Existing Building Code, International Energy Conservation Code, and the Fire Code, International Fire Code. Inspection staff will be reviewing all the first 7. Ryan Erickson will be reviewing the International Fire Code. I did mention ANSI before. We do have an accessibility code, which is referenced in our standards. I thought that was going to be implemented in the 2018, but it's not, so we won't be presenting that until the next code cycle. Just for information, the plumbing and electrical code, you won't see those. Those are state codes, state mandated codes, and they are on their own cycle, the National Electrical Code and the Uniform Plumbing Code. So those are adopted by the state, and we accept those. We're involved in the process, our plumbing and electrical inspector. Each member of the Board of Appeals should have received all the codes that you're going to review. A little about the code book. If you want to look at the IBC page, it's Roman numeral 7. It talks about margin references on that page. And it tells you how the code is referenced for the changes in the code. It starts out solid vertical lines in the margin indicate a technical change in the requirement of the code. Deletion indicators are in the form of an arrow. If you see an arrow, it's going to mean that the code paragraph has been removed, or the whole section has been removed. Single asterisk is placed in the margin indicates text or table has been relocated within the code. And a double asterisk placed in the margin indicates the text or table has been relocated there from somewhere else in the code. So it just tells both sides of the relocation. If you go to Roman numeral 19, that's just the table of contents. Helps you get through the code. Now go way back to chapter 35 on page 613. I just wanted to show you the reference standards section. And any reference standards that are in the code book are shown back on this section. They're also referred to which section those are shown on. If you look at ACI 318, Building Code Requirements for Structural Concrete, Justin probably uses that book. And so here it tells you every section that's referred in. And any reference standard that's in this book is also part of the code book. We get as many as we can, but we don't really get all of them, but we use them. Now back again on page 687 is the index, which helps you find a subject and show you where the code section is for that subject. For staff presentations, staff will present all major code changes to you at these meetings. They'll review each substantive code change together with all amendments. So you're going to see some bars that aren't mentioned. I've seen the code barred 4 pages straight without a real substantive change. So you might see that. You might see certain paragraphs called out. So don't expect to see every change. Some are words. Some are clarification words. So we're not going to do every change that's shown in the book. The format they're going to use, they're going to tell you the section of the code, the page number to go to, and their change. They'll continue explaining code change amendments until interrupted for discussion. Any interruption should be addressed by the chairman, and they should come up to the podium and speak, state their name. Anybody can ask questions at any time during the presentations. Probably best if you have a question to ask while the code section is being reviewed, so it can be discussed. But like I said before, questions, comments, and amendments can be made by anybody in attendance, such as board members or guests. Discussion will not be limited to specific sections, but we're going to try and keep them on the day. If you have a note, bring it up next time. We'll address it at the end of the meeting. Staff will continue until they're complete with their code sections at the conclusion of the hearing. At the conclusion of all hearings, when we get to our final code hearing, we will ask for a motion from the board that we can present to the City Commission to adopt the codes. So our amendments will address all the changes that are brought up, agreed to, and that'll be the motion at the end of this, at all the hearings. So there doesn't need to be a motion every meeting. It'll be at the very end as one conglomerate code change. So, any questions on that? Okay, with that, I'll get started on chapter 1. And that is, I'm on page 1. Section 101, page 1, is the section that actually names the jurisdiction that is adopting this code. So we recommend our amendment of inserting City of Fargo as the jurisdiction in that paragraph. In 101.4.3, that's the plumbing code reference. And we'll recommend continuing the existing amendment, replacing the words International Plumbing Code with North Dakota State Plumbing Code, which is required by our state law. On page 2, 104.2.1, and staff recommends to delete this section in entirety, and it has to do with flood, and we have all our own flood ordinances and codes. So you'll see almost all flood sections deleted in the book. On page 3 is 104.8. That section's on liability, and we're going to recommend continuing an existing local amendment that adds the following language to the paragraph. This code shall not be construed to relieve from or lessen the responsibility of any person owning, operating, or controlling any building or structure for any damages to persons' property caused by defects, nor shall the code enforcement agency or the city be held as assuming any such liability for reason of the inspection authority by this code or any permits or certificates issued under this code. This is language our attorney helped us write after the state law that also is very similar. Uh, 104.10.1 on page 3. Again, it's a flood section. Staff recommends to delete this section. On the next page for 105.2. 105.2 is work exempt from permits. Staff recommends continuing the existing local amendment, which has been on for many years. Number 2, we change fence heights from 7 to 8.5 feet in height, or not over 8.5. Sidewalks and driveways with no restrictions, no permits required. Number 11, swings and other playground equipment for any occupancy. Number 12, window awnings, no permit required. And we add number 14 of re-roofing. On page 6, 107.2.5, this is just an added section on exterior balconies and elevated walking surface to a section on submittal documents. I don't know the background on what required this to be added to the code. There is another section that refers to it, but it wants submittal documents for balconies or elevated walking surface that are exposed to water, and they want information mostly on the impervious moisture barrier for that balcony or deck. On the same page, 107.2.6.1, this is a flood-related section that we'll recommend deleting. One 107.3.1 on page 7. Staff recommends continuing the existing local amendment regarding the plans required to be stamped approved and kept on the construction site. Inspections will not be required to return a plan set to the submitter. So we only require one set for our office, not an additional one to be returned after review. .2. I had that on page 7, but it's page 8. Staff recommends to continue existing amendment to reflect fees for plan review and information on fees, and provides for an additional fee if required. One 10.1 on page 8. All they did there was change in 2 locations the word accessible to visible, having to do with inspecting buildings. I'm guessing that accessible had more to do with accessibility and people were getting it confused. So they just changed the word to visible. Everything needs to be visible for inspecting. 110.3.3 on page 8 is a flood section we recommend deleting. One 110.3.6 on page 8. This is that added section that refers to 107.2.5. It says, where balconies or other elevated walking surfaces are exposed to water from direct or blowing rain, snow, or irrigation, and the structural framing is protected by an impervious moisture barrier, all elements of the barrier system shall not be concealed until inspected. Just appears to me that somebody had a problem with balconies or decks and got it into the code. I don't know if that was really needed, but it's there. 110.3.11.1 on page 9 is a flood section. We recommend deleting. That's it for chapter 1. Chapter 2 on page 13 is a definition section. And like a lot of documents, we refer to definitions a lot in the code for guidance. It used to be different. The definitions used to be in the separate sections. Then it morphed to some were in, some were not. So it has changed that the entire definition section contains all definitions. There's no other definitions in the other sections now. So they're all in one place, which is good. It's supposed to be any word that is italicized in the code is defined. That's why if you're reading a section and it's italicized, there should be a definition in chapter 2. The changes in chapter 2 are page 27. A definition of greenhouse has been added to recognize the unique environment of growing plants, and they can be different than habitable spaces of buildings. There was no real guidance on that previously, for like the energy code, things like that. I do see there's a bunch of gaming definitions added. On page 35, the definition of repair garage has been added. A lot of times there was a gray area for repair garages, trucks stored inside, whether they worked on them or not. So they actually added a definition of repair garage for clarity. Page 37. A definition of sleeping unit has been added. This will clarify that each individual bedroom within residential suites are not considered a sleeping unit, but rather the entire suite with the bedrooms inside of it. That concludes my presentation. Any questions?
I have a question. Looking at the greenhouse definition, they mentioned sunlight, which I would assume would be natural light. How will you interpret if it's not natural light?
What was the question?
It references sunlit environment.
Yep.
And if it isn't sunlit, if it's not natural, will you consider it a greenhouse, or what will it be?
I think we would still consider it a greenhouse. Yeah, there's some things that you're going to find the code doesn't address. It's not addressing the sun going up or down. It's not addressing snow. So there's a lot of conditions like that that aren't really in the code.
Yeah. I'm just thinking you may have that coming up.
Sure.
Is it worth making a change and we omit sun and it's just a lit environment?
I'd have to
I
think
don't know
about
if it
that.
matters to you or to
Well,
other people how it would be affected, but I'm just thinking there's going to be buildings that are coming up that are,
There's one right now. We have one. It's an indoor greenhouse. We all know why it's here in town, and it is just indoor, so it's not sunlit.
sure.
So that might have to do with light and ventilation in itself. I'd have to read the background on it to see, but I'm sure there's a reason they put that in there, and that could be it. If you have a building without the normal greenhouse environment of glass, now you have a different environment inside that building, so. Okay, we'll go on to 3 through 7 on the James Showalter. Commercial.
Good morning. James Showalter, Commercial Building Inspector, and I'll be reviewing chapters 3 through 7 of the 2018 IBC. Let's see, the first section on page 45, 302.1. For clarification purposes, occupied roofs are now mentioned specifically, and they basically say that they can be classified as the occupancy that it nearly closely resembles inside the building, and that's in order to provide, the safest possible building based on the hazards. As long as the roof is the same occupancy as what would be allowed in the building, they're just trying to clarify that the specific requirements for that occupied roof in order to make it safe as the rest of the building. On page 46, 303.4, Assembly Group A3. Greenhouses that are open to the public and are for the purpose of conservation or exhibition shall be considered a Group A3 now. And this purpose is to provide a greater level of protection due to the hazards created by large groups of people. Also on page 46, 305.2, Group E daycare facilities. We recommend keeping our existing amendment, which increases the limit of 5 children to 12 children. And on page 47, section 305.2.2, 5 or fewer children, we also recommend keeping our existing amendment that changes that from 5 to 12 children. And I did just notice that the next section, 305.2.3, we did not currently have an existing amendment for, but we'd also like to recommend an amendment to that, increasing it from 5 to 12 to comply with the state requirements for daycares. Then on page 52, section 308.5, institutional group I4 daycare facilities, we recommend keeping the existing amendment, which increases the number of children from 5 to 12. And the next section, also 308.5.1, classification as a group E, we recommend keeping our existing amendment, which increases the number of children from 5 to 12 also. And the next section, 308.5.3, sorry, skipping one, 5 or fewer persons receiving care, we recommend keeping our existing amendment, increasing it from 5 to 12. And section 308.5.4, 5 or fewer persons receiving care in a dwelling, we also recommend keeping our existing amendment, increasing from 5 children to 12 children. And staying on page 52, section 309.1, which is the mercantile group M. There's a clarification here that makes it clear that greenhouses used for display and sale of plants should be classified as an M. And then on page 53, section 310.3 and 310.4, which is the residential group R2 and R3, there's a modification where non-transient uses like dorms and fraternities and sororities can be classified as an R3 if they're under 16, and they'd be an R2 if there were over 16 units in there. And also the bed and breakfasts must be 10 or less to be considered an R3. Saying, let's see, page 53 still, 311.1.1, accessory storage spaces. Rooms used for storage that is accessory to another occupancy shall be classified as that occupancy. There used to be a limit of 100 square feet, but since storage of a space, as long as it's related to that space, it's not more hazardous than the space, there really is no limit to the size of the storage. But it does need to be directly related. It has to be directly related to the use of that space. On page 54, 311.2, moderate hazard storage group S1, self-storage facilities or mini storage facilities are now specifically classified as an S1 due to the potential for large amounts of combustible materials. Potential, I should say, for storing large amounts of combustibles. And 312.1, communication equipment with an area of less than 1,500 square feet shall be classified as a group U. And 312.1.1, greenhouses. And I mentioned this before, greenhouses shall now be classified as an A3 or an M, where applicable, depending on their use. And where they cannot be classified anywhere else, they should be classified as a U. That's the rest of Chapter 3. Any questions on that? Move on to Chapter 4, page 59. Sorry. First one to mention is on page 49, sorry. And that's 403.2.1.1, which is type of construction. And previously, the H2, H3, and H5 occupancies were allowed a reduction in the required fire resistance ratings of the elements in Table 601. But due to their higher level of hazard, they no longer receive that, that reduction. Yeah. So those were excluded from the exception. On page 62, .6, enclosure of atriums. There's a new exception that's been added to clarify that areas that are not separated by fire resistance rated construction from the atrium, they do not need to be accounted for in the design of the smoke control system, as long as no smoke control is required. It's just a clarification there. And on page 65, 406.3.2.1, we recommend keeping our existing amendment, removing the requirement for doors in private garages or between dwellings in the private garages to be self-closing. So just remove the self-closing requirement. Recommend keeping that amendment. Page, oh, that's backwards, sorry. I think I got the wrong page number on that reference. 406.1, kind of going backwards there, sorry. Motor vehicle related occupancies section has been rearranged to bring all of the requirements into one section. Electric vehicle charging stations are now mentioned, and there's several standards that those need to comply with. On page 65 again, sorry, 406.3, private garages and carports. This section clarifies that private parking garages can be constructed using the regulations of public parking garages, and this would allow like a much larger garage if the occupancy classification was S2. So it allows for a much larger private garages. 406.4.2 on the same page, vehicle barriers. This is just an errata. The section number was wrong. 1607.8.3 should be 1607.9. I believe we all have the first printing, so that should apply to all the first printing books. On page 66, 406.6.2, ventilation of enclosed parking garages. The reference to the mechanical code now specifically mentions the chapters 4 and 5 to be clear that all of the requirements of both sections for ventilation and exhaust are met. Moving on to page 70. Uh, 407.5 smoke barriers. The 2015 allowed the maximum smoke compartment size to increase from 22,500 square feet to 40,000 square feet for an I2 condition 2 occupancy. The 2018 modifies this with 2 exceptions and now only allows the increase in the smoke compartment size if there are single occupant rooms or no occupant rooms. So it just does not allow that increase unless they're single occupants. Page 71, which is 407.5.4, independent egress. There was text added to clarify that if you have access to two separate smoke compartments, then you don't need an individual separate exit. But if you only have access to one smoke compartment, then you do have to have your exit directly to the outdoors from that smoke compartment. It's just a clarification. Page 95. Wait, 420, yeah, 420.2. This is just another errata. Basically, they accidentally added 3 sections that said your walls between your bedrooms and your dwelling unit, your bathroom walls, the things that don't separate your unit, didn't have to be rated, but we always knew they never had to be. So they accidentally added that, but that's an errata. Those 3 exceptions are axed from the code. Same with the horizontal one on the next section, 420.3. That exception said if you had a 2-story unit, you don't have to rate the floor between your upstairs and your downstairs. So that, by errata, that is removed from the code. Same page, 420.7, Group I-1 assisted living housing units. Shared living and meeting spaces in assisted living facilities are now allowed to be open to a rated corridor, provided they meet 9 new criteria. Pretty basic things, but there's just 9 criteria that if you meet, you can have your corridors open to those spaces. Same page, 420.10, cooking appliances. In Group R2 dormitories, the use of domestic cooking appliances is now regulated in both shared areas and sleeping rooms. And then the 420.10.2 basically states that cooktops, ranges, and ovens are not allowed in sleeping rooms in those occupancies. Page 97. 422.6, electrical systems. NFPA 99 is now referenced to clarify that ambulatory care facilities are required to have emergency and standby power. Let's see, Section 423 on storm shelters. This section has been expanded to include requirements for construction with the ICC 500 reference, and it now mentions the required occupant capacity and location of storm shelters when they are provided. Page 98. 424.1, children's play structures are now regulated if they exceed 150 square feet, regardless of their height. Previously, you had to exceed 10 feet and 150 square feet. And those are like the McDonald's, Burger King type play areas they were talking about there. Page 99, 427 section on medical gas systems. It's a new chapter added, and it's basically replicated right out of the IFC. And it's just, it brings over construction details of the medical gas systems if they directly relate to the construction of the building. And that's just for consistency between the IFC and the IBCs. Page 100, 428, higher education labs. That's also a new section, and it's specific to, your college labs. And there's specific requirements that are different than just grouping them in with hazardous. All these chemicals are really specific to the to the lab in the school instead of just, say, a hazardous material storage building. It's a whole new section on that. So that's it for chapter 4. And on to page 103, 503.1. Text has been added that modifies when firewalls can be used. The new text basically reads, for the purpose of determining area limitation, height limitation, and type of construction, each portion of a building separated by one or more firewalls shall comply or shall be considered a separate building. And so the new text was basically for the purposes of determining area limitation, height limitation, and type of construction. And I think the intent is that you're not able to just call these 2 separate buildings so I don't have to sprinkler or something or change your egress or something. It's just basically, if you have to change type of construction, you have to have a firewall. And if you exceed the limits in the tables, you have to have a firewall. So. Page 103 also, 503.1.4, occupied roof. This is a new section that clarifies that occupied roofs are not to be included in the number of stories of a building or in the allowable floor area, as long as the occupancy of the roof would be allowed on the floor immediate below. And enclosures on the roof are limited to a height of 48 inches above the roof surface, but that doesn't apply to, say, a penthouse or other rooftop structures that are regulated by section 1510.
Would that apply to pergolas or
Yeah,
canopies?
I don't think a pergola necessarily, but that's a good question though, because we do have that scenario that we've been dealing with. I think they're talking walls, basically. I don't think you can't build
Like
a
if you
wall.
build a storage shed for like a snowblower or something to blow off your roof, it'd have to be.
Yeah, that would be probably in like a penthouse type of yeah, as long as it's not regulated by 15, then I think it's 4 foot max. But if you can fit under section 1510, which is rooftop structures, then you should be okay with it, I think, yeah.
Okay.
Page 105, the aggregate area of mezzanines and equipment platforms. There's a clarification, because when you have a equipment platform and a mezzanine, you can take up to 2/3 of the area, but it wasn't clear. People are saying, well, I have a small equipment platform and a really big mezz. I can take up 2/3, but no, the mezz can only take up to 1/3 of what it's allowed. So. Let's see, page 111. Let's see, table 506.2, footnote I, the allowable area of greenhouses. The maximum allowable area for a Group U greenhouse has been increased from 5,500 square feet to 9,000 square feet to match that of greenhouses that are allowed as Group B, F2, M, and E. So that's just for consistency. They didn't want it to be used to match that. Page 112, sprinklered one-story buildings. In Group A4, indoor sporting event buildings that are allowed to be unlimited in area, automatic sprinklers are now required in storage rooms, press boxes, concession booths, and other ancillary areas where those had previously been accepted for sprinklers, but now they are required to be sprinklered. Also on page 113, it's the 507.8.1 allowable area. This is an errata that, right on that third line from the top, it's basically the last word. It says building or the area limitation, they change or to nor. So that was part of the errata. Now on page 114, section 508.3.1.2, which is Group I1, Condition 2 occupancies. There's a clarification by means of a new section. And it's basically when considering non-separated uses, if one of the uses is a Group I2, or sorry, I got my notes are, it's either I1 or I2, I'm sorry. 8312. Yeah, it is I2, sorry, excuse me, Group I2, Condition 2. The most restrictive conditions of sections 407, 509, and 712 shall apply to the entire fire area. And Chapter 10 shall apply to the entire path of the means of egress in that condition. And that was just a clarification. Let's see, on page 114 and 115, section 508.4.1 and table 508.4, this is clarification that emphasizes when dealing with occupancies that may be required to be separated for fire area limits or separated for mixed occupancy purposes, that the most restrictive requirements of Chapter 9 shall apply to the entire area, to both sides of the separation. Page 116, section, table 509, incidental uses. The description of stationary storage battery systems has been changed to simply reference the IFC. That way, if the IFC changes, they don't have to make a change to this section. And there's also a new item, I believe, for electrical installations and transformers, and it just basically, to be consistent with the NEC, they added that. 510.2, horizontal building separation. New text is added to clarify that when using this section, and you have a 3-hour separation, horizontal separation, that vertical offsets are allowed in the rated assembly as long as the supporting structure is the same rating. So it's- in order, you don't have to just have one flat building. You could have different ceiling heights and just jog that separation. It was just a clarification because I think people just said, hey, you're changing it, and it has to be one straight assembly, but they just wanted to clarify that. And that is it for chapter 5. Moving on to chapter 6. Table 601, footnote B. There's new text added in this footnote that now exempts the primary structural frame from requiring the individual fire protection as long as the roof is more than 20 feet above any floor surface immediately below. So fairly significant change there.
So is that, I've seen in the past where you have to rate the columns up to 20 feet, but the roof won't have to be rated.
Yeah, and
It's
actually
now
this-
saying the columns won't have to be rated.
Yeah, primary, yeah, even the beams and,
Everything
yeah.
can be
it's-
unrated.
Yeah, yep. Fairly significant, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, page 120, table 602. Yeah, footnote H, it doesn't have a sidebar, but it is a new footnote, and this is added that allows Group U garages to not have fire-rated walls as long as they're at least 5 foot away from the property. This is the same text that was from section 406.3.2 of the 2012, which was removed in the 15, but they basically added it back in a footnote here. So instead of having to have 10-foot fire separation on a detached garage of an apartment, you can go back to 5. On, let's see, section 602.3, which is type 3 construction, and 602.4.1, which is the fire retardant treated wood in exterior walls. There's text added basically to specify that if your exterior wall is at least 6 inches thick, framing and sheathing is allowed to be fire retardant treated. Before, sheathing was not listed, but now it is. And then that's as long as you have a 2 hour. You have to can't have a higher rating than 2 hours on that. So if it's a 3-hour wall, all bets are off. Let's see, page 120, heavy timber. The whole heavy timber section was just reworded, and most of the section was moved to chapter 23. Page 120 also, 603.1, allowable materials. Combustible materials are now allowed in balconies, porches, decks, and exterior stairs that are not part of the required means of egress, as long as it's 3 stories or less above grade. Let's see, that's it for chapter 6. Moving on to chapter 7, page 124. It's section 704.2, column protection, and 704.4.1 is light frame construction. Columns that are required to be protected, like individual encasement, as we talked about before, as long as they are located between top and bottom plates in the wall and they have membrane protection on both sides, you don't have to individually encase those. Page 126, table 705.2. There's a large change in that last line. I think it was in the 2012, it was 40 inches, and then in the 15, it went to 20 feet. And they basically recognized that there was no justification for that big of an increase, so they went back to the 40 inches, which was the previous. And that's basically the separation between your projection and the line for fire separation distance. The distance before you need to protect those, I should say. Page 126 also. Section 705.2.3.1 and 705.2.4. Basically, those 2 sections were relocated to this section here from section 1406. Page 127, section 705.8.1, allowable area of openings. Text was added to clarify that when measuring fire separation distance, you must determine that distance for each story individually. Page 130. Party walls. This is directly related to what I mentioned in 503.1 about the firewalls, where they're meant to only, they actually removed the text in this section that said, portions of buildings separated by firewall shall be considered separate buildings. That's a sentence that they removed. And that's just to be consistent with the purpose of the firewall is to, for type of construction and heights and areas. 706.2, structural stability. This is a new exception added that in seismic design categories D through F, as long as your floor sheathing is 3/4 inch or less, you can continue those through the firewall, which is consistent with construction that we've seen here previously anyway. So kind of caught up with us there. Page 133. 707.3.10, fire areas. Basically, this section never included the term firewalls. It was just fire barriers and horizontal assemblies. Now it's fire barriers, firewalls, or horizontal assemblies. They just included those in that section so you can use a firewall for the same, because firewall is the most restrictive and the most safe type of construction of fire barriers, so they wanted to include that. Let's see. Yeah, I got these a little out of order, sorry. 706.6, vertical continuity of the firewall. We recommend abandoning this existing amendment because it's basically redundant. There's other exceptions that allow you to not have that 30-inch extension of the firewall above the building. There's exceptions where if you have fire retardant treated lumber on the sheathing, you can just terminate it at that. So it's kind of a redundant amendment, and we just recommend discontinuing that existing amendment. Page 134. 708.4 and 708.4.1. Fire partition continuity, the whole section was basically reorganized into 3 groups. There's continuity, supporting construction, and fire blocking and draft stopping. Those are the 3 sections. And basically that fire blocking and draft stopping was moved from other sections of the code into this. It's still mentioned briefly in another section, but most of the specific requirements are all moved to this section right here. Page 135. Oh, sorry, I mentioned that twice. 708.4.2, yeah, sorry, I guess I talked about both of those right in the same sentence. Moving on to page 139. Prohibited penetration, 713.8.1. In the 2012, basically stair shafts received an exception that said the exterior membrane can now have penetrations as long as they're protected. And that was just in stair shafts, but now any shaft can use that. Basically, if it's the exterior membrane of any shaft, you can have electrical outlets and whatever, as long as they are a listed penetration or fire stop. Let's see. Page 143. 715.1, fire-resistant joint systems. Item 10 is a new exception. Basically, it's where the exterior curtain wall meets the roof slab or deck. You don't have to fire stop that. It's just between the floors and the exterior. Also, page 143, 715.3. There's an exception in here that for the joint to be only rated from the inside, you had to be 5 feet away from the property line. Now you have to be 10 feet away for that. Otherwise, it has to be protected from both sides. And page 148. Uh, 716.2.6.5, delayed action closers. This is an addition to the code where delayed action hardware is allowed on self-closing doors as long as the door is not required to be automatic closing the door. Page 154. And the delayed action is basically a door that when you open it, it just stays open. So if you're with a group of people on a tour or whatever you're doing, you can have time to, you don't have to hold the door for everyone, it just holds it open for you, but not allowed on automatically, required to be automatically closing. All right, 717.6.2 on page 154. Yeah, 717.6.2. There's a couple exceptions here talking about ceiling radiation dampers, and there are basically 5 exceptions that were added. The 3 of them to item 2 and 2 exceptions to item 3. And basically, they're saying if you have a tested assembly that says you don't need a ceiling radiation damper, then you don't need one. It gives you more latitude in your design if there's a system that's been tested that shows that has equivalent fire resistance. So it's like an exception to ceiling radiation dampers. Page 156, 718.4, draft stopping in floors and attics. Yeah, this is that section I believe I mentioned earlier. This section was reduced greatly because they moved most of the requirements to 708.4.2. And that is all I have. Any questions? Thank you.
So I'm out of order. We should have followed up with the agenda right before. So let's do that now and then call into the rest of the order of the business on the agenda. Chairman.
Okay, we were calling the meeting to order. Motion to approve our minutes from December 1st, 2016 meeting. Need a motion for that?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Going to read something here on the 2018 code change hearing rules. Hearings will follow as closely as possible to the current schedule published prior to the start of the meetings. The current published schedule is tentative and subject to change. If you have an interest in a specific topic or area of the code and would like to make certain that you do not miss the relevant hearing, you should verify the date of that hearing with the inspections office. Those wishing to speak must wait until they are recognized by the chairperson. Staff will represent all changes from the currently adopted edition of the code being discussed at that hearing. Staff will also present comments on existing amendments to the code in the order in which they would appear in that code. Staff will continue their presentation unless they are interrupted by the chairperson or another member of the Board of Appeals. Votes will not be taken on individual code provisions unless it is determined to be necessary by the chairperson or a vote of the majority of the board members. And all the hearings are open to the public and are held specifically for the purpose of receiving public comment. Is there anything further, or are you ready to end the meeting?
No new business. I already did my report. I'd like to reflect, we did start the meeting at 9:30. Any report, Ryan?
Well, I would just add that I think the board's aware, but the fire code is a companion code too, and so you're going to see a lot of these amendments that were discussed today carry over so that we can match the two. And then some of the changes that their code covers, you'll see more expansion in ours or vice versa. The greenhouse, we have full sections on the medical marijuana facilities coming in the fire code, so something to look forward to.
A little on that. So there are some sections that have a prefix, like an F, and really that, it doesn't mean that that's in that code or vice versa. Ours has some F, theirs will have a B. But it relates to the committee that's actually reviewing and approving that code at the International Code Council. So they have the authority to make the changes in that code, and we both get that section. All done.
With that, we'll call for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion is adjourned. Meeting is adjourned.